My name is Isabella Carter. I'm 29 years old. The ink on my closing papers was barely dry when I walked into my new home and felt my heart stop. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph, the quiet click of my own key and my own lock. Instead, the first thing I saw was a pile of my sister's kids' toys, a bright plastic mountain of primary colors, dumped in the middle of the living room floor. My mother's beige trench coat, the one she wore to every important event, was hanging neatly on the coat rack by the door, as if it had lived there for years, and then I heard it. My father's booming voice, full of authority and satisfaction, carried from the kitchen. "This will be perfect for Lila and the kids." My blood ran cold. My name isn't Lila. My name is Isabella, and this house was mine. Paid for with my own salary. Signed for with my own hand. Fought for through years of relentless, exhausting work. So why was my family inside, carving up my dream and serving it to someone else? Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I should have seen it coming. That thought has become a relentless echo in my mind. The truth is, the foundation for that unbelievable day in my new house wasn't laid that week or that month. It was laid over decades, brick by brick, in 1,000 small moments of casual dismissal that I had learned to swallow like bitter medicine. My older sister Lila was born basking in sunlight. I was born in her shadow. She was the story. I was the footnote. It started so early that the memories are soft around the edges, like old photographs. I remember being 10 years old, standing on the auditorium stage under hot, bright lights. My knees were knocking, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I had made it to the final round of the district-wide spelling bee. The final word was chrysanthemum. I could feel the eyes of 100 parents on me. I took a deep breath, pictured the word from the study guide, and spelled it out, letter by perfect letter. The eruption of applause felt like a physical wave washing over me. The cheap, gold-plated medal they placed around my neck felt as heavy and real as solid gold. I had done something. I had won. The entire walk home, I clutched the certificate in my hand, the paper growing damp from my sweaty palm. I rehearsed how I would tell them, imagining my mom's hug and my dad's proud, booming laugh. I burst through the front door, a triumphant grin plastered on my face, shouting, "I won! I won!" But the scene in the living room stopped me cold. It was like walking into a different world, one where my victory didn't exist. My mother was on her knees in front of Lila, her face alight with an adoration I hadn't seen directed at me since I was a toddler. My father stood behind them, the camera he reserved for special occasions held up to his eye. Lila was standing on a stool, arms outstretched, modeling a brand new, glitter-encrusted cheerleading uniform. It was an explosion of sequins and royal blue fabric, and it had cost, as I would later overhear my mother whispering on the phone, over $200. An astronomical sum for us at the time. "Look, Bella," my mother said, her voice bright and breathless, not even glancing at the medal on my chest. "Just look at your sister. Isn't she a star?" I held up my certificate, the embossed seal catching the light. "I won the spelling bee, Mom. First place in the whole district." She gave it a cursory glance, her smile not faltering, but also not truly seeing. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Very smart. That's our Bella." It was the same tone she used when I finished my vegetables. She then turned back to the main event. "Now stand back, we need to get a good picture of Lila for the mantle." The certificate was eventually tacked to the corkboard in the kitchen, half hidden behind a takeout menu. The 8x10 glossy photo of Lila, striking a pose in her shimmering uniform, was framed in silver and placed in the center of the living room mantelpiece. It was a lesson in family currency. My academic achievement, a product of quiet, lonely hours of study, was worth a pinprick on a crowded board. Lila's sparkle, her public-facing appeal, was worth silver and the place of honor in our home. I learned to stop bringing home my victories, and instead just tucked them away inside myself, where they wouldn't have to compete for the spotlight. As we grew into teenagers, the disparities became more pronounced, shifting from medals and uniforms to things that truly mattered, freedom and future. For Lila's 16th birthday, the entire family was buzzing for weeks. The day of, I woke up to find a cherry-red convertible in our driveway, adorned with a ridiculously large white bow. My father stood beside it, beaming, as he tossed Lila the keys. "Only the best for my girl," he announced to the assembled relatives. Lila, who had never held a job for more than a summer month and whose grades were a steady, uninspired stream of C's, squealed and jumped into the driver's seat. She was popular, she was pretty, and in my family, that was achievement enough. 2 years later, my own 16th birthday arrived. There was no convertible. There was a polite family dinner and a card from my parents. Inside was a savings bond for $500. For college, my father explained, clapping me on the shoulder with a sense of finality. You've always been the responsible one. Responsible. That word was my brand, my label, my cage. It was the justification for giving me less, because I could be counted on to make up the difference myself. While Lila was cruising around with her friends, burning through the gas my parents paid for, my life was a cycle of school and work. I got a job at a greasy spoon diner called the Corner Booth. I spent my weekends and evenings smelling of fried onions and coffee, refilling ketchup bottles, and smiling at rude customers until my jaw ached. I'd come home late at night, my feet throbbing, and do my homework until my eyes burned. Every single dollar of my paycheck, minus a tiny bit for my own gas and insurance, went into a savings account. By the time I was 18, I had saved nearly $3,000. I spent weeks scanning the classifieds and visiting dusty used car lots by myself. I finally found it. A 10-year-old Toyota sedan, a faded metallic beige with a small dent in the passenger door. It rattled when it idled and the air conditioning was weak. But when I paid the man in cash, my cash, earned over hundreds of hours of grueling work. I felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost made me dizzy. I drove it home, my hands gripping the wheel, and parked it in the driveway where Lila's shiny convertible usually sat. My mother came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She squinted at the car, a deep frown line forming between her brows. Isabella, what is that? It's my car, I said, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. I bought it. Are you sure it's safe? She asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. It looks old. It's reliable. And I paid for it myself, I repeated, the words a shield against her disapproval. Well, of course you did, dear, she said, turning to go back inside. You're so responsible. There was no praise, no acknowledgement of the discipline it had taken. It was just an expectation I had met. My hard work was invisible to them. It was simply part of my function. The final, most painful lesson in my place in the family came when my grandmother, Eleanor, passed away. Grandma was my sanctuary. She saw the person behind the responsible label. She'd sit with me for hours, asking about the books I was reading, listening to my dreams of a life outside our small town, and telling me I had a spine of steel. Her death felt like a fundamental support beam had been kicked out from under me. After the funeral, my mother gathered us in Grandma's bedroom. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and mothballs, a smell that had always meant comfort, but now just felt like grief. My mother's mission was to divide up the jewelry. She opened the ornate wooden box on the dresser, and her eyes immediately fell on Grandma's pearl necklace. It was a classic, elegant strand she had worn to every major family event. It was, in my mind, the physical embodiment of her grace. My mother lifted it from its velvet bed. "Oh, Lila!" she breathed, her voice filled with reverence. "This was made for you. It's so timeless." She fastened it around Lila's neck, and my sister, who had spent most of the day texting, looked in the mirror and smiled, admiring her reflection. My mother then turned to me, her expression shifting to one of sentimental pity. She rummaged through a drawer filled with handkerchiefs and old greeting cards, and pulled out a small, silver-plated frame, tarnished at the edges. Inside was a faded photo of me at age 7, grinning a gap-toothed smile at the camera. "She always adored this picture of you," my mom said, her voice soft. "She said you were her little wildflower, always finding a way to grow in the cracks." I stood there, my throat tight, holding a $5 frame while Lila was adorned with a family heirloom worth thousands. The message was brutally clear. Lila deserved tangible assets, things of beauty and value that could be worn and displayed. I deserved a metaphor. I was the wildflower, expected to be content with resilience and sentiment while she inherited the garden. So when I finally decided to tell them about the house, I should have known better. I should have remembered the spelling bee, the car, the pearls. I had clawed my way through college on scholarships and student loans I was still paying off. I had landed a demanding but well-paying job in the tech sector and had spent 6 years living like a monk. No vacations, no designer clothes, no fancy dinners out. My life was a fortress of frugality built around one singular goal, a down payment. It was more than a goal. It was a reclamation. I was going to buy my own value, my own place of honor. I chose a Sunday dinner to announce it, hoping the casual setting might soften the blow of my ambition. "I have some news," I said, my heart thumping nervously. "I've been saving for a while, and I was just pre-approved for a mortgage. I can actually start looking for a house." The clinking of cutlery stopped. My father looked up from his plate. A piece of roast beef paused on his fork. A slow, disbelieving laugh rumbled in his chest. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was a laugh that questioned my sanity. A house, Isabella? Don't get carried away. Do you have any idea what you're talking about? It's a tremendous responsibility, especially for a single woman, my mother added, dabbing her lips with her napkin. The mortgage, the taxes, the upkeep. What if the furnace breaks? You can't handle all that on your own? Lila, ever helpful, chimed in from across the table. She's right, Bella. It's not like you'll have a husband to fix things. Mark is always dealing with our leaky faucet. You'd be calling a plumber every other week. Every word was a small, sharp dismissal of my competence, my hard work, my entire existence as a capable adult. They saw me not as a 29-year-old professional, but as a helpless child playing dress-up with grown-up dreams. I've done the math, I said, my voice tight. I have a detailed budget. I've saved more than enough. I can do this. My father just shook his head, already dismissing me as he returned to his meal. It's a pipe dream, honey. A nice little fantasy? Be realistic. They never asked how much I'd saved. They never asked what I was looking for. They simply erased my dream with their disbelief. And in that moment, I knew I would never tell them anything about it again. The search, the offer, the terrifying mortgage application process. I did it all alone. The house I found was a modest 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street, with a wide front porch and a maple tree in the yard. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a kingdom. My kingdom. The day I got the keys, I felt a sense of peace and triumph that was so pure, so profound, it almost brought me to tears. This house was my proof of life. I should have known they would find a way to take that too. I should have known that in their eyes, my kingdom was just another province to be handed over to their chosen queen. The drive from the lawyer's office to the house was surreal. The keys felt heavy and substantial in my palm, a tangible symbol of my new reality. I had done it. After years of scrimping, saving, and sacrificing, I was a homeowner. I was no longer a guest in someone else's building, paying rent to exist. I had a piece of the world that was mine. I blasted music in my rattling old sedan, singing along at the top of my lungs, a giddy, bubbling joy rising in my chest. I drove past the grocery store, the library, the park, and thought, these are my streets now. This is my neighborhood. This is my home. I turned onto the quiet, tree-lined road, my heart doing a little flip as the house came into view. It was even better than I remembered from the inspection. Solid, welcoming, and blessedly quiet. My plan for the evening was simple. Order a pizza, sit on the floor in the empty living room, and just be. No parents, no sister, no expectations. Just me and the 4 walls that I had earned. But the first crack in my perfect fantasy appeared as I pulled into the driveway. There was another car parked there. A late-model black SUV that I recognized instantly. It was Mark's, my sister's husband. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. What were they doing here? Maybe they saw the sold sign and drove by to see which house I'd bought. A surprise visit. Unlikely, given their previous dismissal, but possible. I tried to shake off the unease as I walked up the stone path. I slid my new key into the lock. The click of the deadbolt turning was satisfying, but the feeling was immediately soured by what I heard from inside. Muffled laughter. Not just one person, several. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the sterile scent of fresh paint and new carpets I was expecting. It was the cloying, floral scent of my mother's signature perfume. It was everywhere, an olfactory invasion. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim interior light, and I saw it. The coat rack by the door, which should have been bare, held my mother's beige trench coat, hung as if it had every right to be there. And beyond that, in the center of the vast, empty living room, was the mountain of evidence. A brightly colored heap of my niece and nephew's toys, a plastic kitchenette, a fleet of monster trucks, a headless Barbie doll. The knot in my stomach turned to a block of ice. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to compute the scene. It was like walking into the wrong house, the wrong life. And then, the voices from the kitchen became clearer. The big bay window will be perfect for the Christmas tree, my mother was saying, her voice filled with cheerful authority. And Mark, my father's voice boomed, you could build a swing set right out back there. The kids would love that. They weren't just visiting. They were planning. They were moving in, not with boxes and furniture, but with their assumptions, their entitlement, their complete and utter disregard for me. They were decorating a life for my sister in the rooms I had just bought. Finally, I found my voice. It came out as a weak, strangled whisper, barely audible over the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. What's going on? 3 heads swiveled in my direction. The laughter choked and died. My mother's face, which had been animated with excitement, instantly rearranged itself into a mask of pleasant surprise. Isabella! Honey, you're here! We were just getting a feel for the place. It's absolutely lovely. She bustled toward me, arms open for a hug that was meant to smooth over the entire bizarre situation, to absorb me into their delusion. I flinched back, taking a physical step away from her. The gesture was small, but it was a rejection, and her smile tightened at the edges. "What are Lila's toys doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking but getting stronger. "Mom, why is your coat on my rack?" I wasn't asking for information. I was making an accusation. My father emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel he must have brought from home. He wore his patriarch face, a look of mild disappointment and weary patience, designed to make me feel like a difficult, irrational child. "Don't be so dramatic, Isabella. We're just helping your sister out." "Helping her with what?" I demanded, my gaze sweeping past him to find Lila. She was leaning against the kitchen counter, studiously avoiding my eyes. She was scrolling through her phone, a perfect picture of detached indifference. Her silence was the most damning thing in the room. It was the silence of a co-conspirator. I addressed her directly, my voice pleading for some shred of sanity. "Lila, what is this?" She finally deigned to look up, her expression a careful blank. "Mom and Dad thought the house would be good for us," she said, her tone casual, as if she were discussing a restaurant recommendation. "The kids need more space than the apartment gives them." The simplicity of her statement, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it, knocked the wind out of me. "Good for you?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Lila, I just bought this house. This morning? It's mine." My mother stepped forward again, placing a placating hand on my arm. Her touch felt possessive, condescending. "Now, honey, let's not get territorial. A house is just a building after all. Bricks and mortar. It is not just a building. It's my home." I was shouting now, the shock finally giving way to a hot, wild surge of rage. "The closing was at 10 a.m. today. My name is on the deed. My money paid for it. How could you just come in here and act like it belongs to you?" And that's when my mother delivered the fatal blow, the words that would sever the last frayed thread of our relationship. She said it without shame, without hesitation, her voice as calm and reasonable as if she were giving me driving directions. "We already promised Lila's family could move in. You don't need all this space, Isabella." The words hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I stared at her, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a test, a grotesque misunderstanding, but her face was serene. She truly believed it. She had performed some kind of maternal alchemy, transmuting my life's work into a gift for my sister, and had done so without ever consulting me. I looked at my father, a desperate, silent appeal. He just nodded, his expression firm. He was backing her play. "Your sister has 2 kids and a husband, Bella," he said, his tone lecturing. "You're one person. It's simple math. We have to do what's best for the family as a whole." The family. That word again. It wasn't a word about love or support. It was a word about hierarchy. It was the excuse they used to justify every sacrifice they demanded of me for Lila's benefit. My college fund that was drained for Lila's dream wedding. The loan I co-signed for Lila's failed business. My time, my money, my energy, all were considered family resources to be allocated by them. And now, my house. "You promised her my house?" I whispered, the words scraping my raw throat. "You gave away something that I bought? Without even asking?" "We didn't want to bother you with the logistics," my mother said smoothly, as if she were a CEO briefing an intern. "We knew you'd do the right thing in the end. You've always been so good at making sacrifices for your sister." The patronizing praise was more insulting than an outright command. I was not a person to them. I was a function, the responsible one, the provider, the one who could be counted on to give and give and give until there was nothing left. I finally turned my full attention back to Lila, the quiet center of the storm, the one for whom this entire demolition of my life had been orchestrated. "And you?" I asked, my voice now dangerously low. "You just went along with this? You were going to let me buy a house for you?" For the first time, a flicker of something, guilt, shame, crossed her face. She gave a little shrug, a gesture of helpless femininity that had always worked on our parents. "They offered, Bella. What was I supposed to do? It's a huge opportunity for us. The kids really do need a yard. A yard. My 6 years of 60-hour work weeks, of ramen noodle dinners, of a non-existent social life, all of it was reduced to a patch of grass for her children to play on. In that moment, something inside me broke. It was the part of me that had spent a lifetime trying to earn their love, the part that quietly accepted the scraps from Lila's table. It fractured, and a cold, hard clarity rushed in to fill the void. I looked at the 3 of them, my father, the stern judge, my mother, the gentle executioner. My sister, the silent thief, and I saw strangers. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. I couldn't stand in that house for another second. It was contaminated with their plans, their expectations. My dream had become a prison. "Isabella, where do you think you're going?" My mother called out, her voice sharp, annoyed that I was deviating from her script. "We're not done discussing this." I didn't look back. I pulled the door open and walked out into the cool evening air, slamming it shut behind me. The sound was a definitive, satisfying crack. It was the sound of a brake. I got into my car, the same car I had been so proud of all those years ago, and I drove away from my brand new home, leaving my family inside to plan their future without me. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, conducted through the medium of absolute silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, not the peaceful kind. It was a silence designed to make me feel isolated, to make me question my own reaction. They were waiting for me to break, to call them, to apologize for my outburst and accept their sensible plan. Every time my phone was quiet for more than an hour, the anxiety would start to crawl up my throat. I'd check to make sure it wasn't on silent, a frantic Pavlovian response. I went to work and moved through my days like a ghost. I'd sit in meetings, staring at pie charts and data projections, but my mind was replaying the scene in the house. My mother's calm, cruel words, my father's dismissive nod, Lila's vacant shrug. I was drowning in the injustice of it, and the silence from them was the water filling my lungs. I hadn't been back to the house. I couldn't bear it. I paid my first mortgage payment online for a home I didn't even live in, a home that felt more like a crime scene than a sanctuary. The sheer absurdity of it all was nauseating. Then, on a Tuesday evening, as I was picking at a joyless salad for dinner, my phone finally rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail, my heart hammering. A minute later, a text popped up. "Isabella, call me. We need to talk." I ignored it. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. I stared at her name on the screen, a tempest of dread and a foolish flicker of hope warring within me. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe they had come to their senses. That flicker of hope, I would soon learn, was the most dangerous thing I possessed. I answered. Her voice was an oil slick of manufactured warmth. "Isabella, honey, we haven't heard from you. Your father and I have been so worried. You know why you haven't heard from me," I replied, my voice a monotone shield. A theatrical sigh crackled through the phone. "I think this has all been a terrible misunderstanding, blown way out of proportion. Your reaction was, well, it was very hurtful. Lila has been crying for days. You've really upset her." The immediate pivot to Lila's feelings was classic. My pain was an inconvenience. Hers was a tragedy. "We just want to talk, to clear the air as a family. Why don't you come over for dinner on Friday? I'll make your favorite roast chicken." The roast chicken. It was her nuclear option, the culinary equivalent of a white flag that was actually a Trojan horse. It was the meal she made the night she convinced me not to go to my dream college in California because Lila would be all alone and needed her big sister. I ended up at the state school 20 minutes away. It was the meal she made when she'd talked me into co-signing a loan for Lila's disastrous Etsy store, selling bedazzled phone cases. A $5,000 loan I finished paying off myself 6 months ago. The smell of roasting chicken was the smell of my own surrender. "I don't know, Mom," I said, hesitation lacing my voice. "Please, Isabella," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "For me, let's just be a family again." That stupid, hopeful part of me won out. The part that was so starved for a normal family that it would walk into a den of lions just because one of them purred. "Fine," I conceded. "I'll be there at 7. It was a mistake I felt in my bones, but I made it anyway. Friday night, I walked up to my parents' front door feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. The house smelled exactly as I knew it would. Rosemary and roasted chicken. A scent so deeply tied to my childhood that it momentarily disarmed me. My father greeted me with a stiff, perfunctory hug that felt more like a pat-down. Lila and her husband, Mark, were already arranged on the living room sofa, a perfect portrait of beleaguered parenthood. They offered me tight, forced smiles. The air was thick with unspoken words, a heavy blanket of resentment masquerading as civility. We sat at the dining table, the one where all my family's most brutal verdicts had been handed down. It was set with the good china and the cloth napkins, a formal stage for the drama that was about to unfold. My mother flitted around the table, a whirlwind of nervous energy, filling water glasses and chattering about the weather, her new haircut, a boring anecdote about a neighbor. It was a frantic performance of normalcy, and it was utterly unconvincing. We made it through the salad course on a thin gruel of small talk. Then, As my mother set the platter of chicken on the table, my father cleared his throat. It was the official signal. The pleasantries were over. The meeting was now in session. Isabella, he began, his voice devoid of warmth. He folded his hands on the table, adopting the posture of a CEO about to deliver bad news to a subordinate. We've all had a great deal of time to think this week. We understand that you were surprised the other day, and we regret that it was handled abruptly. However, we have come up with a very sensible, very logical solution that benefits everyone. He reached down beside his chair and produced a sleek leather folder. He slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped directly in front of my untouched dinner plate. I looked down, my blood running cold. The folder was filled with glossy, professional brochures. I could read the headlines in bold print. Cityscape condos, modern urban living, the Grove residences, luxury meets convenience. Behind them were printed out listings for one-bedroom apartments. My stomach clenched into a tight, painful knot. This wasn't an apology. It was an ambush. We took the liberty of speaking to your mortgage broker, a very helpful young man named David, my father continued, completely oblivious to my shock, or more likely, indifferent to it. He explained that a trade would be quite simple. You sell the house, and Lila and Mark are prepared to offer you a very generous price, your full down payment back, of course, and then you can take that equity and put it directly toward a more manageable property, something more suited to your lifestyle. I stared at him, my mind reeling. They had called my bank. They had spoken to my mortgage broker. They had taken my private financial information and discussed it as if it were a topic for the evening news. The violation was so profound, so complete, that I couldn't form words. My mother, sensing my silent horror, jumped in with her soft, persuasive voice. It's for the best, honey. That big house is far too much for you. Think of the cleaning. And the yard work. A lovely little condo would be so much cozier. We found one with a wonderful gym in the building. You'd like that. Then it was Lila's turn. She leaned forward, her face a mask of sweet concern. Her voice was gentle, as if she were speaking to a toddler. The kids need bedrooms, Bella. They're getting so big they can't share a room forever. And they need a yard to play in. You'll be fine in a one-bedroom. You're hardly ever home anyway, right? And you barely have any furniture to fill a big house. My hands were balled into fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I looked at their faces one by one. My father, the cold strategist, laying out his plan for my capitulation. My mother, the gentle manipulator, trying to convince me that my cage was a cozy nest. My sister, the greedy, smiling beneficiary of my demolition, pretending her entitlement was a matter of her children's needs. And Mark, her silent, complicit husband, nodding along to every word. This was a 4-person firing squad, and I was the one tied to the chair. No, I finally managed to say. The word was quiet, but it landed on the table with the force of a slammed door. My father's benevolent CEO facade cracked. His eyes narrowed. What did you say? No, I repeated, and this time my voice was louder, stronger. I used all my strength to push the leather folder of my new pre-approved life back across the table toward him. I am not selling my house. I am not buying a condo. And you had absolutely no right to call my bank. Do not be selfish, Isabella, he boomed, his voice rising to the volume he used when he was losing control. This is not about what you want. This is about the needs of this family. No, it's about the wants of your favorite child. I shot back, the years of repressed anger finally boiling over. What has Lila ever done to deserve a 3-bedroom house? She works 20 hours a week from home and spends the rest of her time at yoga and getting coffee with friends. I worked 60-hour weeks for 6 straight years for that house. I earned it, Lila gasped, a perfectly executed wounded sound. Tears, as if on command, welled in her eyes. That's not fair. Being a stay-at-home mom is the hardest job in the world. You have no idea what my life is like. Oh, you're right, I don't, I said, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping my lips. I was too busy working and saving the money that you all apparently feel entitled to spend for me. The room exploded into chaos. My father was on his feet, yelling about my flagrant disrespect. My mother was crying, her familiar refrain of "You're tearing the family apart" filling the air. Lila was performing a full-blown melodrama, sobbing into Mark's shoulder as he glared at me with pure hatred. I stood up, my chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. My plate of roast chicken sat cold and untouched. I had completely lost my appetite. I am not doing this, I said, my voice shaking with an intensity that scared even me. The house is mine. It is not a family asset. It is not up for discussion. And if any of you ever contact my bank or set foot on my property again, I swear to God, I will file a restraining order. I turned and walked away from the table, from the carnage of my family life. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace, leaving their shouts and sobs behind me. As I pulled the heavy front door shut, the last thing I heard was my mother's final, desperate shriek. "You'll regret this, Isabella. You're choosing a building over your family." But she was wrong. They hadn't been my family for a very long time. I wasn't choosing a building. I was choosing myself. And as I walked out into the cold, dark night, I felt, for the first time in my entire life, completely and utterly free. The drive away from my parents' house was a blur of streetlights and raw, ragged emotion. I felt hollowed out, as if I'd just survived a multi-car pileup. But underneath the shock and the grief, there was a tiny, hard kernel of something new, resolve. I had stood up to them. I had said no and walked away. I had drawn a line. I fell into a restless, dream-plagued sleep that night, clinging to the naive belief that the worst was over. I thought the battle had been fought at the dinner table, and that a tense, angry peace would now settle. I had no idea that the dinner was merely a preliminary skirmish. The real war was about to be declared, and it was going to be fought in the court of public opinion. I woke up the next morning feeling emotionally hungover. My head throbbed, and my body ached with a deep, soul-level exhaustion. I made a pot of strong coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket on my little apartment sofa, and did what we all do when we're seeking mindless distraction. I started scrolling through social media. I was numbly flicking past baby photos and political memes when my thumb froze. It was a post from Lila. The picture was the first thing that made my stomach lurch. It wasn't a picture of her family. It was a sun-drenched, professionally shot stock photo of a happy, attractive family. A smiling mom, a handsome dad, 2 perfect kids, laughing on the porch of a beautiful craftsman-style house that was a near-perfect double of mine. It was a carefully curated image of a life she hadn't earned but was now claiming. And then I read the caption. It was a work of art, a masterclass in manipulative, saccharine prose designed for maximum public sympathy, feeling so incredibly blessed and grateful. It began, punctuated with a prayer hands emoji. After a lot of searching and so many prayers, Mark and I are so excited to announce that our little family will finally be getting a big house with a yard for the kids to run around in very, very soon. It truly takes a village, and we are just bursting with gratitude for our amazing family who is making this dream a reality for us. It just goes to show that when you put family first, anything is possible. We can't wait to start our next chapter. Blessed to family first. New beginnings. Dream home, Kirk grateful heart. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes. Our amazing family who is making this dream a reality. She was talking about me. She was talking about my house. But she had twisted the narrative into something unrecognizable. In Lila's version of reality, she wasn't a willing participant in an emotional mugging. She was the humble, grateful recipient of an incredible act of familial generosity. And I, by extension, was the selfless, benevolent benefactor, happily surrendering my greatest achievement for the good of the family. She had stolen my house and was now trying to steal my story too, recasting me in a role I had never auditioned for. My hands started to shake. I clicked on the comments, a masochistic impulse I couldn't resist. They were flooding in, dozens of them from every corner of our lives. My Aunt Karen, my mother's sister, was first. "Lila, honey, this is the most wonderful news. You, Mark, and the kids deserve every happiness in the world. Your parents must be so proud." An old neighbor, Mrs. Gable, wrote, "Oh, how lovely. I always knew you were destined for a beautiful life. Tell your sister she's a saint for helping you out like this." A saint? The word felt like a slap. They were canonizing me for a sacrifice I was actively fighting against. The comments kept coming, each one a fresh wave of nausea. Friends from high school, distant cousins, my parents' friends, they all chimed in with a chorus of congratulations for Lila and praise for my supposed generosity. Not a single person questioned it. Not one person wrote, "Wait, I thought Isabella just bought a house?" The propaganda campaign had been devastatingly effective. My parents had clearly been working the phones, preemptively spinning their version of the story to our entire social circle. Then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a friend I hadn't seen since college. "Hey, Bella! Saw Lila's post. That is so incredibly generous of you to let them have your house. You're seriously the best sister ever. When are you moving out so they can get in?" The casual cruelty of that last line, "When are you moving out?" took my breath away. It wasn't even a question of if. In the world my family had constructed, My departure was a foregone conclusion. I was just a logistical problem to be solved. Another text came through. It was my cousin David. Heard you're downsizing to a condo. Smart move. Less to worry about. Let me know if you need help packing up your apartment. Packing. They were all so eager to help me pack, to shrink my life down into a manageable one-bedroom box so that Lila could have her kingdom. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot, suffocating flush that started in my chest and spread to my face. This wasn't a private family matter anymore. They had made it public. They had turned my life into a town spectacle, and I was cast as the villain if I didn't play my assigned part. I imagined the whispers at the next family gathering, the pitying looks at the grocery store. There's Isabella Carter, the selfish one, the one who almost ruined her sister's dream. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the opposite wall with a dull thud and skittered under the sofa. I couldn't look at it anymore. I felt trapped, besieged on all sides by the cheerful, smiling faces of people who had already passed judgment on me based on a lie. They had built a prison of public opinion around me, and the walls were closing in. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, pacing my tiny apartment. I tried to read, but the words wouldn't focus. I tried to watch TV, but the happy families on the screen felt like a personal mockery. Every potential buzz of my phone made me flinch. The public humiliation was their checkmate. They knew I was private, non-confrontational. They knew I cared about what people thought of me. They had taken my most vulnerable qualities and turned them into weapons to be used against me. Late that night, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I fished my phone out from under the couch. The screen was cracked, a fitting metaphor for how I felt. There were 37 missed calls and over 50 new text messages. I scrolled through them, a gallery of my own social execution. Then I saw it. The final message. It was from my mother, sent just an hour before. I hope you've seen all the lovely supportive messages on Lila's Facebook page. It read, everyone in this town, everyone in this family is so happy for her. They all see what the right thing to do is. Don't you dare embarrass us now by being selfish and backing out. Everyone is watching you, Isabella. Everyone is watching you. That was the line. That was the moment the fear and humiliation and grief burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the moment I realized they had made a fatal error in their calculations. They thought that by putting me in the spotlight, they would force me to fold. But what they had actually done was corner me. And they had forgotten that even the most timid, overlooked creatures will fight back with everything they have when they are cornered. They had stripped me of my family's love, of my community's respect, of my own story. They had left me with nothing. And in doing so, they had given me the one thing I never had before, the freedom to fight back without fear of losing anything, because everything I thought I had was already gone. I sat there in the dark, the cracked screen of my phone illuminating my face, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier preparing for war, of course. Here is the conclusion of the story, with each of the next 4 parts expanded to approximately 3,000 words, followed by the resolution and final call to action. The decision to fight back was made in the silent, lonely darkness of my apartment. But the first light of dawn brought with it the sobering reality of what that fight would entail. My family, having failed to secure my surrender through public shaming, escalated their tactics from a cold war of public opinion to a hot war of direct, relentless assault. My phone, which I had thrown against the wall, became their primary weapon. After retrieving it and seeing the spiderweb crack on the screen, I realized it was a fitting symbol for the state of my life. The first call came from my father. I was at my desk at work, trying to focus on a complex line of code, when his name flashed on the screen. My stomach immediately plummeted. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, my desk phone rang. It was the front desk. Isabella, your father is on line 1. He says it's an emergency. An emergency? Of course. Their manufactured crisis was now an emergency that required me to drop everything. Trapped, I picked up the receiver. Hi, Dad. Don't you hi, Dad me? His voice boomed, so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. There was no preamble, no pretense of concern. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Your mother is a mess. Your sister is beside herself, and you're ignoring our calls. This nonsense has gone on long enough. You have embarrassed this family in front of everyone we know. I haven't done anything, I said, my voice quiet but firm, mindful of my coworkers in the open plan office. Lila is the one who posted a lie on Facebook. You are the ones who refuse to accept that my house is mine. Your house, he scoffed, the sound a crackle of static and contempt. You wouldn't have a dime to your name if it weren't for the upbringing your mother and I gave you. We taught you the value of hard work. We supported you. The hypocrisy was so staggering it almost made me laugh. Supported me? You called my dream a pipe dream. You laughed in my face. I got this house in spite of you, not because of you. You are an ungrateful, selfish child, he roared, his voice thick with rage. You are choosing a pile of bricks and wood over your own blood. Your sister needs that house. Her children need that house. I am telling you, not asking you to fix this mess you've made. You will call Lila, you will apologize for upsetting her, and you will agree to the condo plan we laid out for you. Is that clear? It was a command, an order from a man who still saw me as a rebellious teenager, not a grown woman who owned her own property. The old Isabella would have stammered, cried, maybe even given in, but the old Isabella was gone. No, I said, the single word falling like a stone into the tense silence. What did you just say to me? He sputtered, his fury turning to disbelief. No, it is not clear. Because it is not going to happen. I have to get back to work now, Dad. And before he could unleash another volley of insults, I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling so violently that I had to place it flat on my desk to still it. My heart was racing, but I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I had survived a direct hit. An hour later, my cell phone rang. It was my mother. I knew her approach would be different. Dad was the hammer. She was the poison. I answered, Isabella? Her voice was thick with tears. A calculated, theatrical sob. Honey, I don't know what to do. You're breaking my heart. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of the stress you're putting him under. I'm not doing anything, Mom, I said, my voice weary. I'm just trying to live my life. But your life affects other people, she cried. That's what being in a family means. It means we make sacrifices for each other. You know how sensitive your sister is. She feels like you've completely rejected her. She looks at her children and all she can think about is the beautiful, safe home you're keeping from them. How can you be so cruel? It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. In her telling, I wasn't the victim of a coordinated familial heist. I was a cruel tormentor, dangling a key to happiness just out of my sensitive sister's reach. Mom, I am not keeping anything from her. It's not hers to have. I worked for it. I paid for it. Why is that so difficult for any of you to understand? Because it's not about money, Isabella. It's about need, she insisted, her voice rising with righteous fervor. Lila needs this. You don't. It's that simple. We raised you to be better than this, to be kind and generous. I don't know who this cold, hard person you've become is. Maybe I became this person after my own family tried to give away my house behind my back, I said, my voice sharp. She gasped, wounded. We were trying to help everyone. We were trying to be good parents to both our children. Can't you see that? All we want is for our girls to be happy. Just let Lila have the house. You'll find another place someday. Please, honey, do it for your mother. Do it for your family. I can't, I said, and I hung up before her tears could erode my resolve. The next phase of the assault came via text message, a relentless barrage from the wider family, all of them deputized by my mother. Aunt Karen was the most persistent. Her first text, Isabella, honey, your mother called me. She's a complete wreck. I think you're being very unfair. I ignored it. An hour later, family is the most important thing we have. Houses come and go. Don't throw away your family for a piece of property. I deleted it. 2 hours after that, Lila has always looked up to you. You're her big sister. You're supposed to protect her, not hurt her. What you're doing is hurting the whole family. And finally, late that night, your parents did everything for you girls. The least you can do is show them some respect and listen to their advice. They know what's best. Just let Lila have the house. It will make everyone's life so much easier. It was a flood of guilt, a tidal wave of obligation meant to sweep me away. I felt exhausted, battered. They were coming at me from all sides, a coordinated attack designed to wear me down until I had no strength left to fight. The climax of the campaign came on Saturday afternoon. I was in my apartment trying to lose myself in a book when the doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Lila. She was standing there on my doorstep, a nervous, practiced smile on her face. And next to her, propped against the wall, was a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes. I stood there frozen, not making a sound. I could see her shifting her weight, her smile faltering. She rang the bell again, a longer, more insistent buzz. Then she called out, her voice syrupy sweet. Bella? Are you in there? It's me. I remained silent, my back pressed against the door, holding my breath. Bella, come on, I know you're home. I saw your car, she called, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. I just want to talk. I slowly, carefully slid the chain lock into place. Then I opened the door, just 2 inches. Her face, framed in the gap, looked surprised. "What do you want, Lila?" I asked, my voice flat. Her smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, hi to you too," she said with a forced laugh. "I brought some boxes. I figured it would be easier if we just got started. We could pack up your kitchen today. It'll be less overwhelming if you have some help." I stared at her, at the sheer, unmitigated gall of her words. She hadn't come to talk. She had come to start the eviction. She genuinely believed that if she just showed up and started packing my life into boxes, I would simply let it happen. "What you figured," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "was that if you showed up here and created a scene, I would be too embarrassed to say no. You figured wrong?" The fake smile vanished from her face, replaced by a flash of anger. "Don't be like this, Isabella. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. Mom and Dad are right. You're being incredibly selfish." "Selfish?" I let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're standing on my doorstep with boxes to pack my belongings so you can move your family into a house I bought, and you're calling me selfish? I'm thinking about my children," she shot back, her voice rising. "Something you wouldn't understand. They need a home, a real home with a yard. You're ruining their lives over some stupid house. If you want a house with a yard, Lila, then I suggest you do what I did. Get a job, work your butt off for 6 years, save every penny, and buy one yourself. This one is mine," her face contorted with rage. "You've always been like this, always thinking you're so much better than me just because you're responsible. I hate you," she shrieked, the final word echoing in the quiet hallway of my apartment building. "Get off my property," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "It's not your property. It's just an apartment," she screamed, her composure completely gone. "It is where I live, and you are no longer welcome here. Goodbye, Lila." And with that, I closed the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and leaned against it, my body trembling with adrenaline. I had survived the phone calls. I had survived the texts. And now I had survived the final physical invasion. They had thrown everything they had at me, and I was still standing. After the scene with Lila at my door, a deceptive and unsettling calm descended. The relentless phone calls stopped. The barrage of guilt-laden texts from my extended family dried up. It was as if a storm had suddenly passed, leaving behind an eerie, unnatural silence. For a few days, I allowed a sliver of hope to take root. Maybe they had finally gotten the message. Maybe shutting the door in Lila's face, as brutal as it felt, was the definitive statement they needed. Maybe, just maybe, they had given up. The silence was a balm on my raw nerves. I started to breathe again. I went to work and found myself able to concentrate for the first time in weeks. I started sleeping through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. The quiet gave me the courage to finally reclaim the physical space of my house. On a bright, clear Saturday morning, I drove to my property. I parked in my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time looking at my house. It was still standing. It was still mine. Taking a deep breath, I got out and used my new key to unlock the front door. The air inside was stale but peaceful. There were no ghosts of my family's ambition in the empty rooms. I walked through the house, running my hand along the walls, imagining where my sofa would go, what color I would paint the bedroom. I opened the windows to let the fresh air in, and as the breeze circulated, it felt like it was clearing away the toxic energy of their invasion. I spent the entire day there, cleaning the floors, wiping down the counters, making plans. For the first time since I'd closed on it, the house felt like a promise again, not a battlefield. I left that evening feeling lighter than I had in a month, a fragile optimism blooming in my chest. I thought I had weathered the worst of it. I was so wrong. The breaking point didn't come with a shout or a confrontation. It came quietly, insidiously, through an automated email that landed in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line was innocuous. "Your account information has been updated." It was from my mortgage company. I frowned, assuming it was just a generic notification. I opened it. "Dear Isabella Carter," it began. "This email is to confirm that a request has been made to change the mailing address on file for your account. If you did not authorize this change, please contact our customer service department immediately at..." My blood turned to ice. I read the sentence again, then a third time. "A request has been made to change the mailing address." I hadn't made any such request. My hands started to shake. I immediately minimized the email and pulled up the mortgage company's website, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard as I typed in my login information. I navigated to my account profile page. There, under contact information, was my address, correct and unchanged. But next to it was a small notification in red letters. "Pending request for address change. Click for details," I clicked. And I saw it. The new address they had requested my account be changed to. It was my parents' address. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the sides of my desk to steady myself. This was different. The emotional pressure, the public shaming, even Lila showing up with moving boxes, all of that was, in its own twisted way, a family dispute. This was not. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to intercept my legal and financial mail. This was an attempt to take control of my mortgage, the single largest financial asset I owned. This was fraud. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for the mortgage company. After navigating an infuriating automated menu, I finally got a human on the line, a cheerful-sounding woman named Brenda. "Hi," I said, my voice tight and unnatural. "My name is Isabella Carter. I received an email about a request to change my mailing address, and I did not make that request." "Okay, Ms. Carter, I can certainly look into that for you," Brenda said calmly. "Can you please verify your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your social security number?" I gave her the information, my mind racing. How could they have done this? Did they forge my signature on a form? "All right, thank you for that," Brenda said. "Let me see. Yes, I do see a request was initiated yesterday via a phone call. We were just waiting for the system to process it." "A phone call?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Someone called, pretending to be me?" "Yes, that's right," Brenda said, her cheerful tone unwavering. "A woman who identified herself as Isabella Carter called in yesterday afternoon to update her mailing address." A woman. It was my mother. It had to be. I could picture her perfectly, sitting at her kitchen table, her voice full of sweet sincerity as she lied to a stranger in order to hijack my life. "And you just did it?" I asked, incredulous. "You didn't verify her identity?" "Oh, of course we did, ma'am," Brenda said reassuringly. "We have security protocols. I can see from the notes here that my colleague asked the caller to verify your date of birth, your social security number, and your mother's maiden name." The phone almost slipped from my hand. My mother's maiden name. The irony was so bitter it felt like acid in my throat. My own mother had used her identity as a security password to defraud her daughter. She had used the intimate knowledge of my life, knowledge a mother is supposed to have, as a weapon against me. Thankfully, Brenda continued, the change was automatically flagged and put on hold by our system. It looks like the caller was unable to answer a 4th security question regarding the make and model of your first car. So the request was never fully processed. My old Toyota. My beat-up, rattling sedan that I had bought with my own diner money. The car my mother had looked at with such disdain. That symbol of my own hard-won independence had, in the end, been the one thing that protected me. It was the one detail of my actual self-made life that they had never bothered to notice or remember. "So, I can confirm the request has been canceled," Brenda said brightly. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said numbly. "Thank you." I hung up the phone and sat at my desk, staring into the middle distance. The sounds of the office around me, the clicking of keyboards, the low hum of conversation, faded into a dull roar. For weeks I had been operating under the assumption that I was in a painful but recognizable family conflict. I had been hurt, I had been angry, I had been humiliated, but in that moment, all of those emotions were burned away by a terrifying, clarifying fire. This was the true breaking point. This was the moment I finally and completely understood. They did not see me as their daughter. They did not see me as a person with rights and a future of her own. They saw me as a problem to be solved, an obstacle in the path of their chosen daughter's happiness. And they were willing to break the law, to commit a crime, to remove that obstacle. They were not trying to persuade me anymore. They were trying to erase me. I thought about the what-ifs. What if I hadn't seen that email? What if my first car had been a gift from them? A detail they knew. They would have gained control of my mortgage statements. What would have come next? Forged signatures on transfer documents? A fraudulent power of attorney? There was no bottom. I saw that now. There was no line they would not cross. The grief I felt in that moment was profound, deeper than anything that had come before. It was the grief of an orphan. The family I had spent my life trying to please, trying to earn love from, was a fiction. The people who shared my blood and my name were strangers, and they were dangerous. I sat there for a long time, the cold clarity hardening inside me. The tears I expected to come never did. The shaking in my hands stopped. The anger and the hurt receded, replaced by something cold, still and absolute. It was the quiet, calm resolve of someone who has survived a catastrophe and is now standing in the wreckage, knowing the only thing left to do is to start building again, but this time, with walls of stone and a gate of iron. They had pushed me past the point of no return. The question was no longer how to save my relationship with my family. The only question left was how to protect myself from them. The person who walked out of my office building that evening was not the same one who had walked in that morning. The hurt, conflicted, emotionally battered Isabella was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone forged in the fire of that final, unforgivable betrayal. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for hope, no more energy for grief. My emotional circuits had overloaded and reset, leaving behind a single clear imperative: protect yourself. My family had declared war, and my quiet revenge would be to build an impenetrable defense. The first step was to cut their lines of communication. On the drive home, I pulled over to the side of the road. I took out my phone and opened my contacts. My father's name was at the top of the list. For a lifetime, seeing his name had elicited a complex mix of fear, respect, and a desperate desire for approval. Now it felt like looking at the name of a foreign enemy. I tapped his name, selected block this caller, and confirmed. A small, profound sense of relief washed over me. One down. Next, my mother. The woman whose voice could trigger either comfort or dread. Blocked. Then Lila. My sister, my childhood roommate, my lifelong rival. Blocked. I went through the list, methodically and without emotion. Aunt Karen. My uncle who had called to mediate. Any relative I knew was in their camp. Block, block, block. With each tap of the screen, I felt a chain breaking. I was severing the tethers that they had used to pull me, to control me, to wound me. By the time I was done, my world had become blessedly, beautifully silent. The next morning, I drove straight to the house, not with the hopeful optimism of the previous weekend, but with the focused purpose of a general securing a fortress. My first call was to a 24-hour locksmith. A man in a van arrived within the hour. I watched, my arms crossed, as he used a power drill to bore out the existing locks on the front and back doors. The high-pitched whine of the drill was a symphony of severance. He installed heavy-duty deadbolts, the kind that couldn't be easily picked or bypassed. He handed me a set of new, unique keys. "No one's getting through these without a battering ram," he said with a grin. I paid him in cash and held the keys in my hand. They felt like weapons. My next step was surveillance. That afternoon, I went to an electronics store and bought a state-of-the-art security system with multiple cameras. I spent the entire weekend at the house, alone, methodically installing them. I mounted one camera above the front door, angled to capture the entire porch and walkway. I put another on the back of the house, covering the yard and the back door. A third I placed inside in a corner of the living room, covering the main entry points. I wasn't just protecting myself from a potential break-in. I was preparing for their next move. I knew they would be back. When Lila showed up with moving boxes, it was harassment. If she did it again now, with cameras recording and no trespassing signs I had bought and hammered into the front lawn, it would be evidence. With the physical asset secured, I turned my attention to building my legal case. I transformed from victim to archivist. I spent an entire evening turning my apartment into a war room. I retrieved my phone from under the sofa and, despite the cracked screen, began the painstaking process of documenting their campaign of terror. I scrolled back through weeks of messages. Every manipulative text from my mother, "You're breaking my heart, Isabella," was screenshotted and saved to a dedicated folder on my laptop. Every angry, demanding voicemail from my father was played on speaker and recorded, creating a separate audio file. I transcribed his threats, his insults, his commands. I went back to Lila's now infamous Facebook post. I screenshotted the post itself with its syrupy, false caption. Then I went through and screenshotted every single comment from family and friends congratulating her and praising my generosity. It was a perfect record of their public gaslighting campaign. I printed everything. The stack of paper grew on my dining table. Text messages, call logs, screenshots. I organized it all into a binder, creating a meticulous timeline of the harassment, from the initial confrontation at the house to the phone call where my mother tried to commit fraud. I wrote a detailed, dispassionate account of that call with the mortgage company, noting the date, the time, and the name of the representative I spoke to. The binder was thick, heavy, and damning. It was the story of their obsession, told in their own words. Looking at it, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt the cold, satisfying certainty of a prosecutor who knows they have an airtight case. The final step was to seek professional help. I spent hours online, not looking for a family therapist, but for a lawyer. I didn't search for a general practitioner. I searched for property dispute lawyers, harassment, and real estate litigation. I was looking for a shark. I found a highly rated firm downtown and scheduled a consultation with a senior partner named Arthur Vance. I walked into his polished, wood-paneled office a week later. He was an older man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened patiently, without interruption, as I laid out the entire story, from my childhood as the responsible one to the fraudulent phone call. My voice was steady. I did not cry. When I was done speaking, I opened my binder and placed it on the large mahogany desk between us. "This is my evidence," I said. He spent the next 20 minutes silently reading through the pages. He studied the texts. He looked at the Facebook screenshots. He read my summary of the mortgage company incident. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. When he was finished, he closed the binder, folded his hands on top of it, and looked me straight in the eye. His expression was grim. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble, "let me be perfectly clear. This is not a typical family squabble over an inheritance. What you have documented here is a systematic and escalating campaign of harassment. Their public posts could be considered defamation, and their attempt to access your mortgage account by impersonating you is not just unethical, it is a potential felony. Specifically, wire fraud." The validation in his words was so powerful it was like a physical weight being lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was, in fact, underreacting. "They won't stop," I said. "I've blocked their calls, but they'll find another way. They'll show up again. They feel entitled to this house, and they believe they have the right to do whatever it takes to get it. Then we need to disabuse them of that notion," he said, his tone turning sharp and strategic. "We have several options. We can file for a restraining order. We can report the fraud attempt to the authorities. But first, I suggest we start with a clear, unequivocal shot across the bow. A formal cease and desist letter accompanied by no trespass notices, delivered via certified mail. It will inform them that any further contact will be considered harassment, and any attempt to set foot on your property will result in their immediate arrest." He leaned back in his chair. "It will put them on notice that the game has changed. You are no longer their daughter to be manipulated. You are a property owner with legal rights, and you are prepared to enforce them to the fullest extent of the law." I felt a surge of strength, of power, that was entirely new. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their attacks. I was planning my own countermove. I had an ally, and my ally was the law. "I want to do more than just make them stop," I said, my voice quiet but steely. "I want them to understand that there are consequences." Mr. Vance gave me a thin, approving smile. "I understand completely," he said. "So, let's prepare the documents." I left his office an hour later, the quiet revenge I had been planning now having a name, a strategy, and the full weight of the legal system behind it. They had left me with no family, but they had given me a cause, and I was ready to fight. For 2 weeks after my meeting with Mr. Vance, the silence from my family continued. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was my silence, not theirs. My phone was a peaceful object in my purse, not a ticking time bomb. I knew, however, that this quiet was temporary. They were regrouping. Their direct assaults had failed, and my subsequent lack of communication would be infuriating them. I was no longer playing my part in their drama, and it would be driving them insane. The summons came, as I predicted, through a channel I hadn't blocked. A text from a cousin who had, up until this point, remained neutral. "Isabella, your dad called me. He said there's a family meeting at their house on Sunday at noon. He said it's not a request. You need to be there. They want to settle all of this for good. Settle this." I almost smiled. They still believed they were in control, that they could command my presence and dictate the terms of my surrender. The old me would have been terrified, sick with anxiety for days. The new me simply replied, "Okay, I will be there." The days leading up to the meeting were calm. I felt no fear. I spent the time preparing as a general prepares for a final, decisive battle. Mr. Vance had drawn up the documents, and they were formidable. I went over them every night, not out of nervousness, but to familiarize myself with the language, the statutes, the cold, hard power they represented. On Sunday morning, I didn't agonize over what to wear. I chose a simple black blazer, a gray blouse, and dark trousers. It was armor. It was the uniform of a person who was there to conduct business, not to beg for forgiveness or understanding. I placed the crisp, thick folder prepared by my lawyer into my briefcase. It felt heavier than its weight in paper. It felt like justice. The drive to my parents' house was like visiting a foreign country I used to live in. The familiar streets, the houses of my childhood friends, all seemed distant and unreal. I was no longer a part of this world. I was an outsider now, an envoy from the new life I was building. When I arrived, my father's and Mark's cars were already in the driveway. I parked on the street, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked up the path to the house where I grew up. I didn't knock. I used the old key they'd never asked for back and let myself in. They were all there, assembled in the living room like a tribunal. My father sat in his high-backed armchair, the throne. My mother was perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisted in her lap. Lila and Mark sat together on the love seat, a united front of simmering resentment. They all looked up as I entered, their faces a mixture of anger, impatience, and smug expectation. They thought my agreeing to come meant I was finally broken. They thought I was there to capitulate. I didn't sit down. I walked to the center of the room and remained standing, placing my briefcase on the coffee table. This was not a social call. I was not staying. My father, as always, took the lead. He looked at me, his face a thundercloud of patriarchal disapproval. "Isabella?" he began, his voice a low growl. "This has gone on long enough. Your mother has been sick with worry. Your sister's life has been in limbo. You have dragged this family's name through the mud with your selfish, childish behavior. It ends today." He gestured to a small stack of papers on the end table next to his chair. "I have had a quitclaim deed drawn up by a friend of mine at the golf club. You will sign it, transferring the house to your sister and her husband. They have generously agreed to give you your down payment back, and we can all put this unfortunate episode behind us." He said it all with such absolute certainty, such unwavering conviction in his own authority. He was not negotiating. He was delivering a verdict. He truly believed he could command me to sign away my own home. I looked at him, at all of them, and felt nothing but a profound and final sense of pity. They were so trapped in their own delusion, they couldn't see the cliff they were about to walk off. Slowly, deliberately, I opened my briefcase and took out my folder. It was a simple, plain manila folder, but it felt like a weapon system. I placed it on the coffee table with a soft but definitive thud. "I won't be signing that," I said, my voice calm and even. The lack of emotion in my tone seemed to confuse them. They were expecting tears or anger. They were not prepared for composure. I opened my folder. "But I do have some documents for you." I took out the first set of papers and slid them across the table toward my father. "These are no trespass warnings. They are legally binding. They state that if any of you, my father, my mother, my sister, or her husband, set foot on my property at any time for any reason, I will have you arrested." My father stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Mark let out a short, scoffing laugh. Lila just looked confused. I took out the next document. "This," I continued, my voice steady, "is a formal cease and desist letter, prepared by my attorney. It documents the campaign of harassment you have waged against me for the last month, including threatening phone calls and public defamation. It demands that you cease all contact with me immediately. Any further attempt to call, text, email, or approach me will be met with legal action." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Attorney? Isabella, you can't be serious." "Oh, I am completely serious," I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them. "Which brings me to my final exhibit." I reached into the folder and pulled out the last stack of papers. This was the evidence binder I had so meticulously compiled. I didn't slide it over. I stood up, walked around the coffee table, and placed it directly in my mother's lap. "This is a copy of the evidence I have collected," I said, looking down at her. "It includes screenshots of every text message you sent me. It includes a recording of Dad's threatening voicemail. It includes the screenshots of Lila's Facebook post and the public campaign to humiliate me. And on the top page, you will find my sworn affidavit, a detailed account of the phone call you made to my mortgage company, where you committed fraud by impersonating me in an attempt to illegally access my financial accounts." The color drained from my mother's face. Lila leaned over to look, her eyes widening in horror as she saw her own Facebook post printed out in black and white. My father snatched the papers from my mother's lap, his face turning a dark, mottled red as he read. The smug confidence had vanished, replaced by a dawning, panicked understanding. They were silent. The entire room was utterly, completely silent. For the first time in my life, I had all the power. Finally, my mother looked up at me, her eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before. Her voice was a choked, desperate whisper. "Isabella, you wouldn't do this to your own family." I looked at her, at this woman who had given me life and then tried to steal it from me. I looked at my father, who saw me as an asset to be managed. I looked at my sister, who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. And I felt the last vestiges of my old life fall away. I looked my mother straight in the eye. "I already did," I said. Then I turned, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the house, leaving them in the ruins of the world they had built. I didn't look back. A year can feel like a lifetime. The person who walked out of that living room, leaving a nuclear bomb of legal documents in her wake, was a stranger to the woman who had cried over a spelling bee certificate and a pearl necklace. The showdown was not the end of the war, but it was the final, decisive battle. They were routed. The threat of legal action, the stark reality of seeing their own words and deeds laid out as evidence, was enough to shatter their delusion of untouchability. There were no more calls, no more texts, no more ambushes. There was only a vast, cold silence. In the months that followed, I moved into my house. The process was slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. I didn't hire movers. I rented a small truck, and with the help of a few real friends, I moved my life from the cramped apartment to the spacious, sunlit rooms of my craftsman. Every box I unpacked felt like an act of reclamation. I painted the walls myself, choosing colors that made me feel calm and happy. A soft sage green for the living room, a warm, buttery yellow for the kitchen. I spent weekends assembling furniture, my hands sore but my heart full. The house slowly transformed from an empty, contested territory into a home. My home. I learned through the grapevine of my remaining neutral relatives what had happened after I left. There was no grand explosion, just a quiet, messy implosion. My father, faced with a problem he couldn't bully into submission, had retreated into a stony, resentful silence. My mother, stripped of her emotional leverage, had apparently taken to her bed for a week with nervous exhaustion. Lila and Mark, realizing the house was well and truly gone, had a massive fight that resulted in them renewing the lease on their cramped apartment for another year. The public narrative they had so carefully crafted collapsed. There were no more celebratory posts, just an awkward silence that spoke volumes. My parents sent one final desperate message through my cousin, a few months after the showdown. "Your mother wants to know if you'll come for Christmas dinner. She says she'll make your favorite." The offer of a roast chicken, once a tool of manipulation, was now just a pathetic, transparent plea. I told my cousin to thank them for the invitation, but that I had other plans. I did. I hosted a small Christmas for my friends, the family I had chosen, not the one I was born into. We drank wine and laughed in my living room, in front of the Christmas tree that stood in the bay window, right where my mother had wanted to put Lila's. A year to the day after I closed on the house, I was sitting on my front porch swing, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the leaves on the maple tree turn from green to gold. The air was crisp and the neighborhood was quiet. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a part of me. It was filled with the scent of my coffee, the books I loved, the sound of the music I played. It was a sanctuary I had fought for and won. My peace is priceless. Lila still lives in her apartment. My parents and I have not spoken a single word to each other in a year. Sometimes a pang of sadness hits me for the family I wish I had, the family I deserved. But it's a fleeting ghost, quickly chased away by the solid, reassuring reality of the life I have built for myself. They thought my greatest achievement was theirs to give away, but they were wrong. I didn't just keep the house. I kept my dignity. I kept my future. I kept myself. And I will never ever let anyone take that from me again. If you've ever had family try to take what you worked for, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. I promise, you're not alone.